Airport workers, what is the most heartbreaking goodbye you witnessed? My family is based in the Philippines, but my dad was British and he had to go home because of his cancer. My sister was denied a passport citizenship by the UK, so she needed a visa with my mom. I didn't need one. We sent him ahead and were soon to follow him to the UK as we were just waiting for my sister's visa. My mom and sister were denied by the embassy for a visa. The look on my sister's face when she said goodbye to my father at the airport broke me. She couldn't let go of his hand and the security had to follow her and gently tell her to return to us as she had run to follow my dad. Her wails when she had to learn she couldn't see my dad broke me more when the letter of denial arrived. I had to fly alone to take care of my dad. They never got to say goodbye properly when he died because the cancer took him so quick. My sister was 8 years old when that happened 2 years ago. Until now it breaks my heart. Really sorry for you and your family. I'm a worker and a few years back I had a guy come into my bar with what I assume was his girlfriend or fling. Whatever. At one point he was asking me, how do you do it? It's gotta be sad watching people say goodbye all the time, and I truthfully told him that not many people make a big scene about goodbyes at this airport. I haven't seen any that have stuck with me. Eventually his girlfriend leaves to get on her plane and he continues drinking a bit. I'm friendly and keep talking to him. Eventually he goes to leave, but not after writing a laughably long note on the receipt about how that was a married woman that he sleeps with whenever she's in town and she's going to tell her husband she wants a divorce, but then finished the note with, and I quote, "If you ever want your pretty dong sucked, give me a call." To this day, that is the most memorable goodbye I've seen, and I don't even remember him saying goodbye to the woman. Just that there was a goodbye. TLDR. Man comes in and asks about how many goodbyes we must see in an airport. Has a farewell drink and meal with a woman he's in an affair with, and after she leaves he propositions his male bartender for sex. Met the love of my life just a couple months before moving to New Zealand. For a whole bunch of seemingly valid reasons he couldn't come and we said goodbye at Belfast Inl. I had already rebooked to stay longer while drunk in a pub a week earlier, so 8 was flying back to have 12 hours overnight to empty out my apartment and then fly to New Zealand. That goodbye nearly destroyed me, knowing that I loved him so much, but we had been together such a short time that long distance would be a struggle. It was awful. We cried and held each other until it was almost too late, and then I cried through security and the whole flight. Super heartbreaking. Happy ending though. Due to not having a car that day, his dad dropped us off at the airport, and when he saw how devastated my boyfriend was upon returning to the car, he basically said, "If she's so important to you, why aren't you going to New Zealand?" And there we were. Barely a month later he had a flight, a visa, and we were apartment hunting. I know in my heart we could have survived the distance, but hot dang I'm glad we didn't have to try. Not sure if it counts, but I worked as an airport interpreter. Some years back I was dealing with the morning flight to Mexico and waiting for the afternoon people to fly in from out of state to go on their connecting flight to Cancun. One young guy with a guitar was standing around and talking with people. He was talking up the flight attendants and looking like he's having a great time. He gets a call and soon turned somber. It happened too fast. As his flight is boarding to Mexico, he comes up to the front desk to tell us he has to cancel his flight and go back home. His dad had been killed in a car crash. We all felt so horrible for him. He turned around and went home to grieve. This wasn't the only time something like this happened. We had a flight that was cancelled due to technical difficulties, and a guy was on his way to Mexico to bury his dad. The funeral was that night and he was desperate to make it. His somber face is something I can't forget. There was also the ladies I met who were going to Mexico because their kids had gotten married and were honeymooning in Mexico City. The son of one died in a shootout in a nightclub, and the daughter of the other got shot but was in stable condition. They were going to claim a body and to make sure the daughter was taken care of. Once saw a little girl who was trying to run after her father when he entered the security. Her mother held her back. The sound of her crying will always stay with me. It was really heartbreaking. I met the love of my life and only got to spend 3 days with her before she got on a plane back to Japan where she was living at the time. It would be 6 months until I saw her again. Married 15 years last month. Not a worker, but the most heartbreaking airport goodbye I had was after visiting my girlfriend in England for the first time. She is British. I'm Canadian and we met online through a mutual friend and immediately clicked. I was only 18 at the time and had no idea how I was going to fly to Europe to meet her. Eventually, after 18 months of online dating, I managed to save up enough to stay in the UK with her and her family for a month. It was one of the most amazing things I've ever done. Visiting London and seeing the sights was incredible, and first meeting her in the airport was such a relief. Seeing her not as a picture in my phone, voice in my headset or face on my computer chat but as a real person led to so many emotions. We did everything together and were inseparable, and her family loved me, just like I loved them. They were so great to me and I'll never thank them enough. Eventually the time came and I had to leave. The final few days of the trip turned from excitement and happiness to curled up in bed watching movies and lots of crying. It was heartbreaking holding her in her room and assuring her that I would see her again, but the truth was I couldn't guarantee that. This trip cost me thousands of dollars and I had no idea when or if I would ever see her again. Squeezing her hand at the airport and comforting her took all of my emotional energy and I nearly broke, but I had to be strong for her. She needed me to be her rock and I did the best that I could. Once luggage was checked and I had to go through security, that was when the sobbing really started. Forcing myself to walk away from her as her parents took her sobbing back to the car was one of the hardest things I've done in my entire life. Long distance is brutal and I don't wish it on anybody. I know I wouldn't do it again. I managed to go twice more. I spent 6 weeks in England the next year and then flew again before Christmas to propose. We've been married for nearly 2 years now and she's the love of my life. She lives with me in Canada because it was easiest for us while I finish my degree, but if she wants to move back home then I'll follow her anywhere. It's the least I could do. Well, that absolutely brightened my day. Not a worker, but me saying goodbye to my 7-year-old daughter as I left for a 10-month deployment. I deployed fairly often in our marriage, and when the kids were little, those were somewhat easy. The wife understood and the kids were so young they got through it fairly easy. This deployment was right after our family spent 18 months living in an RV while I was in grad school and spending every moment together on the California coast, hiking up and down miles and miles of trails. My daughter and I had grown particularly close. I taught her to read. I walked her to school each day. We spent evening on the beach and rainy days coloring together or watching Doctor Who. The trip in question, that really hurt, was virtually a no-notice trip. One moment we are back in North Carolina on another camping trip, and 2 weeks later, I am leaving for 10+ months. This was the first time she understood, albeit in a limited way, some of the dangers associated with the trip and the length of time. I will always remember her soul-wrenching sobbing as I left. As a follow-up, I helped her over the trip by writing her and her sister and her mother daily. I even got access to several dozen children's books and read them to her on a DVD and then sent them to her as a package weekly. Even though she is now turning 16, I occasionally see her looking through them from time to time. My nieces are going through this now and I always think that stable internet and video chat makes it so much easier. Zed, who is such a daddy's girl, will just take a picture of me for daddy periodically throughout the day to make sure her father doesn't miss anything that she does. When I met my so, she'd told me she was going to spend a year abroad in Europe for her last year of college. We were together for about a year and a half before she left for Europe. At the airport, after spending 2 weeks abroad with her to help her set up her apartment and school things, I managed to keep it together until I reached the bathroom of the waiting area and then cried for probably 10-15 straight minutes until my entire face hurt. Long distance relationships are hard, but we managed to text every day and Skype every other day. It was difficult, but we made it through and just got done moving in together. Basically same story as me and my boyfriend. Not an airport worker. When I was 19, my twin brother was moving to Canada for his last year of university and my dad and I saw him off at the airport. When it came time to leave him, we both hugged him, told him we loved him, and he walked off up the ramp with his ticket. I looked at my dad and he just held both of his hands to his chest and tears were rolling down his cheek. Second time I had ever saw him cry. My brother stayed for 2 years in the end before coming home. Sadly, the year after he came back my dad passed away suddenly. That day at the airport was 15 years ago now and I'll never forget the look on my dad's face. How much he loved us. Letting him go and be free, even though it hurt him so much. We are moving soon to another country in search of a better life. I dread the day that we will have to say goodbye to our parents at the airport. The thought of leaving them behind really hurts me. That's why I asked this question in the first place. I moved to Dublin from Italy to study, so I see my parents once every 2 months. I know it's not much compared to the other stories here, but it still feels bad leaving. And this morning I had to say goodbye to my mom and cried so dang much. Man, being from Venezuela, I've seen a fair share of goodbyes, including my own. It's heartbreaking. Families being torn apart because you're searching for a better future. I remember when I first left, my mom was falling apart watching her little boy disappear behind airport security. I remember being numb, like I was watching my life from the outside. I visited about 7 months later. I had difficulty adjusting to the US and the cultural shock hit me pretty hard. I remember hugging a friend goodbye when I had to catch my plane back and sobbing as though I was marching to my own execution, saying between my wallowing that I didn't want to be alone anymore. Goodbyes are hard, man. I hope you feel better now and are not alone anymore. Best wishes to you. Before I was born, my mom had breast cancer. When I turned 7, she was told she had uterine cancer. By the grace of God, they caught it super early. My parents were in the midst of a divorce but obviously put it on pause so my dad could help my mom in every way. He was working for Rubbermaid at the time and used all of his time off to take care of mom and take her to treatments and such. Rubbermaid decided that dad needed to go to China to take care of some issues that had arose with a product he had designed. My sisters and I took him to the airport and my dad started tearing up and told us to take care of mom and each other while he was gone. Apparently the look on my sisters and I faces was pretty upsetting to other people around us because dad said on the flight, a lady stopped him and hugged him saying she was praying for our family. He came home 2 weeks later. Mom went into remission and has remained cancer free for 20 years. They did end up getting a divorce but it was pretty amicable. Oh, and he quit Rubbermaid after he got home and was offered a general manager position of a plant of a smaller company where he has stayed since. He strongly dislikes Rubbermaid. He missed several of our birthdays due to work, traveling for work and last minute crises that would arise. I'm straight up never buying a Rubbermaid product now. A mid to late 20s couple was doing the typical sobbing, hugging, loving and affection emotions towards each other. This went on for a while. Guy was going overseas for a company thing. Didn't catch it until they had to part. The guy did the walking backwards, waving, blowing kisses, etc etc. She stood there waving, being all emotional herself. The second he was out of sight, she did a complete 180, emotional and physical, just turned on a dime, walked away and went straight up into the arms of another guy waiting at a bar. She said something along the lines of, "Okay, the boy is gone, let's go. Get this B an Oscar." Not the actual goodbye, but I picked up my friend from the airport after she moved back home to pursue a good job in her career. She lived across the country and her boyfriend didn't want to do long distance or move anytime soon. Her face didn't look like she stopped crying for the entire flight. I was pretty close to crying and I wasn't even sad about anything. Just seeing someone suffering that much just sucks. Saying goodbye to my boyfriend at the airport a couple weeks ago was the first time I've ever seen him cry. I was already a sobbing mess but seeing him sob was the most heartbreaking moment for me. Won't be able to meet again for another year or two when I can't move there more permanently. Well, obligatory not an airport W occur anyhow. Now that that's out of the way, my Danish mother met my father at 23 and immigrated to the USA to be with him. Fast forward 30 years. My grandma comes to the States for one last visit as she was terminally ill and knew time was not on her side. She got to meet my newborn daughter and we spent 2 weeks just enjoying each other's company. But when it was time for her to leave, it was essentially a forever goodbye because we all knew it was the last time we would see her ever again. She passed away the 1st of August. R.I.P. Gram. I'm so sorry for your loss. Hope you feel better soon. Not heartbreaking, but an interesting perspective. When I was 21, I moved to the UK for 4 years. I remember being very excited and a little irritated with my mom for being so emotional and making a big deal out of it. In January, my son moved to Spain. I watched him in tears go through security until I couldn't see him anymore. As soon as I got in the car, I called my mom and apologized for my actions 34 years earlier. Heartbreaking in a different way, a lady came in to get on an Angel flight. Pilots donate a flight for people who need to get to medical, mainly cancer I think, appointments in larger cities, with her husband. She clearly looked ill, but you could tell she was a feisty one. Her and her husband were holding it together during the goodbye. She got on the plane just fine. Her and the pilot took off. Her husband stayed and watched from the window in our lobby until they were in the air, out of sight, then quietly walked out the door. You could just tell she means the world to him, and what I found heartbreaking was the amount of worry that he was experiencing in that moment. Good news though, I saw them fly out several more times and she only got more of her feistiness and color back each time. Haven't seen her in a while and I hope that's a great sign. Corporate Angels is a literal lifesaver. They've been flying me for over 4 years now. My fiance is coming home from his first deployment in a month. I'm going to be a wreck. It's been an extremely difficult trip for both of us. So good luck to those airport staff, I suppose. This would be the opposite of heartbreaking to witness though. I don't work at an airport, but I once saw a teen, probably 17-19, getting on a plane to go to college. One of their parents was obviously dying of cancers or something. I overheard them a little too intentionally while in line for a cinnamon bun or something. Lots of, "I don't want you to put your life on hold for me and I don't want you to see me when I get worse" comments in between sob crying hugs. TBH, I bit my lip when going through security so I wouldn't tear up. Not a worker, but when I put my 7-year-old stepson on a plane to visit his mom for the summer, I didn't know it was the last time I'd get to see him for a year because his dad and I were divorcing. But my son must have. He tried to jump out of my arms and kept yelling for Mister. That's what I called his brother. Not an airport worker, but leaving my family friends to go to college in the US, originally from Europe when I was 17. I knew I wouldn't see any of my family or friends for 9 months, that I would celebrate Christmas, New Year, and my 18th birthday without them. Hugging my family before going through security, seeing and hearing my little sister sobbing and my mom, who is really tough and barely shows any emotion, cry was so hard, and I was a sobbing mess myself for the whole 8H plane ride. I saw a person get deboarded on the tarmac in a casket that was draped in an American flag and rolled over to their crying parents. So heartbreaking that I'm actually tearing up remembering it. Happened to one of my employees. He went back to his home country, which he hasn't visited in many years. His elderly father insisted on coming to the airport with his brother to pick him up. While going through customs, his dad had a heart attack in the arrival waiting area and passed away. Mine would have to be saying goodbye to my boyfriend. We had been stationed together for about a year and were going to new bases on opposite sides of the world. We had spent 2 weeks together in his hometown and I was going back to my base before he was heading to his. We said goodbye at the airport, not know when we would be able to see each other again. I was in tears and could barely hold it together as I waited in line for Tsar. He's not a very expressive guy and doesn't really react in emotional ways, but he waited in one spot and I zigzagged my way up the queue. It was such a small gesture but meant so much that he would wait until he could catch me a few more times before leaving. I'm tearing up just thinking about it. I love him so much. My son left yesterday to start his 3rd year in uni. He is my best friend and my heart is breaking right now. My house is so quiet today. We are moving my oldest to college tomorrow. I thought I was handling it well until the other night when we were talking about what to pack. Started crying. Tomorrow I know will be emotional. I am so proud of her and so excited for her future. And she is only 3 hours away, but she was my first baby and I feel like I'm preparing to have my arm cut off. I work in a gift shop that's right in front of the Tsar checkpoint. An older woman was saying goodbye to someone who I assume was her grandson or son and broke down on the floor after he left, sobbing and screaming that she's never going to have a chance to see him again. On the upside, I get to see a lot of reunions and a lot of people bring big ole doggers to pick up their humans. It's absolutely adorable. I'm not an airport worker, but the worst thing that I have ever seen was at the San Diego airport. I was waiting in line behind a dad, his 2 kids, and a dog at the cargo area where you take your pets. Before you get mad, Reddit. This was like 15 years ago before I knew how horrible airline transport is for animals. Everyone was crying. I couldn't help but overhear the whole story. Family was down to their last dollar after moving to California for a now failed business and was flying home. The dad has no idea that he needed a health certificate for his dog to fly. Their flight was leaving soon, and they had no family or friends in the area and no money to wait a few days for a vet appointment. I was there to send my cats home to Maryland ahead of me. I had to drive my car across country, so I asked where the dog needed to go. Ohio. So I drove the dog home. They were so desperate that they just handed their dog to a stranger. One of the weirdest things I've ever done. I love dogs, and that was a sweet dog, but 3 long days in the back of my little Dodge Neon and we were very happy to be rid of each other. I still think about him though. We had a few adventures but that was a rough trip. Love this story. I can only imagine how grateful that family was to see you pull up with their doggo. Not sure about the saddest goodbye, but I remember the saddest hello. A woman in her mid-50s was standing and waiting at the arrival gates. She looked like she had been crying recently. A young guy, looked like he was about 25, comes through the doors with tears in his eyes and runs over to the woman. They hug and he said, "I'm sorry you were alone when dad died. I felt like someone punched me in the gut." I am not an airport worker, but one time I was sitting waiting for my flight and these 2 police officers were waiting by a gate. The flight gets in and the people start filing out. A mom and a younger daughter come out and the daughter bursts into tears when she sees the police officers. The officers talk to what I assume was the grandmother. I don't really know. I don't know how any of them were related really. I just know the oldest lady was taken away to be talked to and the other 2 were behind talking with the other cop while the younger girl was sobbing. So that was pretty weird and sad to see. Once saw a guy being forcibly carried up the steps of a plane by 2 policemen, followed by 2 obviously sad small children, carrying a cuddly toy each. Not exactly a goodbye, but heartbreakingly awful nonetheless. Not an airport worker, but I was probably someone's saddest goodbye. Back in February my grandmother was admitted to the ICU after she went into respiratory failure, and I was told it'd be a good idea if I flew out ASAP. Fortunately she ended up being okay, but initially it wasn't looking good and I was a wreck the whole day. Ended up taking a late flight, and when I got to the airport I realized I hadn't eaten, so I stopped at the only restaurant bar open that late, ordered some chicken yakisoba and a beer, and the waiter offered me a shot. I declined since my stomach was empty and all. Drank the first beer, but couldn't muster enough of an appetite to eat the food. Said screw it and ordered a second beer, and when the waiter set it down on the table he said, "Don't give up on me." I realized then he clearly knew I was having a rough time, and while I'd seen him interact with other tables he just let me have my space and didn't bother with the usual "how's the food" and such, but never even asked me if I was ready for the check. Just let me sit there and quietly drink my beer until I was ready to go, even though they were still fairly busy. Nice guy. Tipped him 50%. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.